We'll continue now with our programming from the Radio Free Europe Radio Liberty Fund Conference with an address by Polish Solidarity leader Lech Wałęsa. He was the final speaker at the conference in Washington Wednesday. Earlier in the day, Mr. Wałęsa addressed a joint session of Congress.
You heard Gene Pell in his introductory remarks refer to one of the veterans of Radio Free Europe, a man who is revered in Poland. He's with us today, Jan Nowak. And we have some alumni. I'm proud to introduce the former president of Radio Free Europe, John Richardson. And he will be here in a few moments, Mr. Justice Buckley, who was a prior president of Radio Free Europe and now a member of the U.S. Court of Appeals for District of Columbia. He'll be introduced separately, but we do have a former chairman of the Board of International Broadcasting, Ambassador David Abshire. Now, let me turn to the program. As I told you before we adjourned for lunch, we have our panel, who will be introduced by our moderator, Malcolm Forbes, Jr., and then Mr. Wałęsa will be coming in around 2:15. We will continue with the discussion as long as it's possible to do so. When Mr. Wałęsa comes in, he will have prepared remarks for 15 minutes or so, and then we'll answer questions. Now I turn you to the head of the Board of International Broadcasting, the chairman of Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, Malcolm Forbes, Jr. Now, I should introduce him properly. You all know that in addition to those titles, he's publisher of Forbes magazine. But I had a very interesting experience with him. We were in Moscow together, and we called on former ambassador from the USSR, Anatoly Dobrynin. At the conclusion of our interview, Steve Forbes said, "Now, Mr. Ambassador, I always leave a token of our organization with the person that I'm meeting. We are the capitalist tool, and we have a tie that has that slogan, and I'd very much like you to have one of those ties." So he presented them, and Dobrynin, who has a good sense of humor, took off his own tie and put on the capitalist tool tie, and off he went to a luncheon with Gorbachev. He subsequently was removed from the Central Committee. Steve Forbes.
Thank you very much, Leonard. Maybe that explains why I got a missive from Gorbachev asking me to send one to Mr. Ligachev and a few others. As Leonard was very kind in his introduction, but actually my success in life is really because I did what most of you haven't done, and that is to pick parents who already owned a successful business. Came to the attention of top management at a fairly young age, sort of the capitalism version of the nomenclatura. So I have a little bit of sympathy for those in Eastern Europe. Maybe we should become pen pals. But we do have a very distinguished panel here today to discuss the Western response to the failure of communism and how we should respond to these extraordinary events. We think it will get some good insights from what they have to say and in the subsequent question and answer period. On my right, going down the panel, all of you, most of these people do need no introduction. Jean Kirkpatrick, Ambassador Kirkpatrick, has had a very distinguished career in both the academic world and in public life. Her perceptive writings on the nature of totalitarianism and communism and how it subverts the individual, how it subverts vocabulary and people's sense of their past, their culture, their ability to be independent beings are really without equal. She is a person, I think all would agree, of extraordinary intellectual courage. Sitting next to her is a man who's going to give us a very unique insight and a very appropriate one, Felix Roten. Felix is a refugee of Central Europe, of Austria, more than 45 years ago. And he brings a unique dimension because he spent his life in the financial world. He's not only been a participant in the financial world, but a successful participant and a man of great innovation. He not only participated in that world, but he also was an observer of its structures, of its shortcomings, of the institutions that make a financial world work and not work. He's had a distinguished career not only on Wall Street, but in saving the financial markets back in 1970 and playing a critical role in saving New York City from bankruptcy in the mid-1970s. So his observations on how we go from command economy, a totalitarian economy, to a more free economy, more vibrant economy, we think will be especially relevant. Alain Besançon is one of the outstanding Soviet scholars in the Western world. He's enormously respected by his peers. He currently holds the chair of Russian culture at the École des Hautes Études en Sciences Sociales in Paris. Please, Doctor, excuse my French. My French, when I went to school, never got beyond Chevrolet Coupe. But he is taught at the Hoover Institute. He's been a fellow at the All Souls College at Oxford. He's an author of numerous articles and books, and as I say, among Soviet scholars, experts in the Soviet field, this man is an outstanding member of it. A couple of his books, that among the many, one is The Soviet Syndrome, another is The Rise of the Gulag, The Intellectual Origins of Leninism and Marxism. Outstanding individual and will give us a European perspective. On his right is Ambassador David Abshire. As Leonard said, David is formerly head of the BIB, which I now head, and he had a very distinguished career there. He heads CSIS right now. He's the former ambassador to NATO, former assistant to the president, and given his background with NATO, we think his comments on what the future of the Western Alliance is will be particularly relevant given what happened on November 9th with the wall. So without further ado, let's get to the reasons why we're here. Let's start off with Ambassador Kirkpatrick. Thank you.
Great. How are you? Thank you very much. I'm pleased to be here. What is obviously an exciting time, extraordinarily interesting time. I think, as always, our reflection and analysis should begin, indeed must begin, by a clear-cut identification of what's happened, what's actually going on here. And what's not happening. What's happened is not the end of Soviet power. However exciting it is, it's not the end of Soviet power. It's not the end of Soviet power in Europe, in Eastern Europe. It's not the end of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union's power inside the Soviet Union. It's not the establishment of democracy in any country in Eastern Europe yet. What is going on? What's going on, first, I think, is that the people, or the successors of the people who rang down the Iron Curtain, have rung it up, so to speak. And the raising of the Iron Curtain signals their recognition of the failure of the totalitarian project, and I believe the abandonment of the totalitarian project. Now, what was the totalitarian project anyway? It was, of course, an extraordinary and utopian, we all know, grandiose dream by a group of Russian emigres of not only seizing power in a major country, but having seized that power, to exercising it over all aspects of the society. The totalitarian project was comprehensive control over a whole society, a whole culture, a whole economy, comprehensive, centralized, exclusive, monopolistic control over all aspects of life within a determinate area. And in Very quickly, it was clear even to Joseph Stalin, I think, that this was a difficult undertaking, one which could perhaps only be achieved, in his view, in an insulated environment. The insulation of Eastern Europe is, I think, a direct consequence of the effort to achieve a monopoly and maintain a monopoly over the control of the symbolic environment. No idea, no thought, however fleeting, no religion, no philosophy should sully the minds of the people within the area which the totalitarian rulers sought to achieve total control. And what's happened is, I think, the admission by those who attempted it of the failure of their effort at comprehensive central control of the economy and the failure at comprehensive centralized control of the symbolic environment. Not only did they not eradicate all alternative views of the world and preferences and beliefs and tastes and convictions and desires, but they had less and less success in the effort to control either the symbolic environment or the preferences of the people who lived in the society. They could neither prevent Soviet people or the Czech people or the East German people from hearing about blue jeans, if you will, or religion, be it Judaism or Anabaptistism or any other religion, nor could they prevent them from wanting it. And the effort to engineer souls, as Lenin called it, consumed more and more effort and became more and more counterproductive. And I think that the great achievement, really, and accomplishment of Mikhail Gorbachev has simply been to recognize the failure of the effort at comprehensive control of the economy. He said, our economy is a mess wherever you look. It's worse than it seemed at first sight. The closer you look, the worse it appears to be. He recognized the failure of the effort to control the economy. He recognized the failure to control the symbolic environment and engineer, as it were, new types of human beings. The effort to engineer the soul, I think, has been effectively abandoned. That's very big news, and it's very important. But it doesn't mean a lot of other things. It doesn't mean that this is the end of Soviet power or the end of one-party government in the Soviet Union. It just means that the totalitarian project has not only failed, but its failure has been recognized by those who attempted to impose it on their societies. Gorbachev, for a period, talked quite a lot about the new economic policy and where Lenin was when he went back to the NEP. And then when I ask myself, what is it Gorbachev is attempting to do, I face two things almost immediately. One is that I don't know what he's attempting to do. Maybe the reason I don't know what he's attempting to do is that he doesn't know what he's attempting to do. That's possible. Maybe the reason I don't know what he's attempting to do is that he hasn't told us what he's trying to do. Is he, in fact, seeking an end to the kind of socialism to which Stalin finally led the Soviet Union, which involves comprehensive control of the economy, for example, comprehensive, centralized, bureaucratized control of everything? Is that what he would like to be rid of? Is he, in fact, seeking an end to socialism in any form that we know it? I think that's a possibility which we must now at least raise with ourselves. I don't know what he's intending. It may be that he's intending to start again where Lenin started with the new economic policy. That may be what he now has in mind. It may be that he intends to start again where the Tsar left off, or where Kerensky left off. We don't really know what Gorbachev aims at today. It may be that Gorbachev intends to break up the game, as it were, in Europe, in which he found his own possibilities, so the possibilities for the expansion of Soviet power blocked on all sides, and that the dramatic policies, departures in Eastern Europe signal an effort by Gorbachev to eliminate the borders between East and West so that Soviet influence can be extended across those borders. As long as there's a border separating East and West, not only it constitutes a barrier to Soviet influence as well. And I believe that Gorbachev's talk about a common European home and a Europe that stretches from the Atlantic to the Urals must be taken very seriously. He's been speaking about it since he came to power. He's written about it. He reiterates it. My own expectation is that he will propose in his conversations with George Bush and the dramatic new departures in conventional force reductions. And that he will, in the conversations with Helmut Kohl and other European leaders, talk continuously about proposals which would lead effectively to the demilitarization of perhaps Germany, of perhaps Central Europe, the dismantling of NATO and the Warsaw Pact. I noted with enormous interest the discussion on Soviet radio, television, and the occasion of Gorbachev's visit to Finland 10 days ago, of Finland as the model for Soviet relations with its neighbors of whatever size, the importance, the emphasis on the importance of Finland, and the glorious, beautiful was the word that was used, example of Soviet relations with Finland. These are interesting to observe. I hope that our own president and government, in meeting with Gorbachev and dealing with him, will bear in mind the failed courtship, as Bob Nisbet called it in his book on Stalin and Roosevelt, the failed courtship, the failure of a foreign policy based on personal relationships between Stalin and Roosevelt. I don't think that works, no matter how much affinity it may turn out that President Bush has with President Gorbachev. It will not turn out to be the basis of a sound foreign policy. And second, I hope he will note that no matter how skillful a settlement may be, it will not end politics. I think the great American illusion is that we can somehow negotiate an end to politics, or achieve an end to politics, an end to the ceaseless, restless striving after power by nations, and that won't work. Not last time, not this time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gene. We'll now go to Felix Roden. Felix?
To me, what is happening in Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union, looking at the economic side of the issue, is really simply the end of an idea, the end of the illusion that communism can provide a viable economic system. I think that idea is now dead, beyond redemption. And I think ideas that die in the field of economics ultimately die in the field of politics, because political systems, I think, at the end of the 20th century have to be connected to viable economic systems. And I've always believed that once solutions of problems by military means come to an end. They have to be solved by economic means, and if they can't be solved by economic means within one political system, the political system will change. I think the Western response to what is happening in Eastern Europe and in the Soviet Union should probably be somewhat more aggressive than it has been so far. I quite sympathize for a deliberate answer to some of these problems because it's very, very hard to see clear solutions. A lot of the things that may be tried are going to fail. They're going to fail whether we're involved or whether we're not involved. But I do think both from an economic and political point of view that there should be a more aggressive response to what's happening in Eastern Europe. And I would simply put the condition of assistance to any Eastern European country as based on a simple test: the willingness to hold free elections and the willingness to have a multi-party system. And any country in the East that is willing to adopt those measures should be eligible for whatever assistance we develop. I think that assistance should be probably divided into three categories. One, very short term, which means next winter. Winter is a hard time in the East. I think really serious emergency measures involving food, fuel, whatever else is needed should be started on a very aggressive basis through the Red Cross, through the United Nations organizations, and organized very quickly. Secondly, a medium-term debt relief program involving the external debt of, at this point in this process, would be Poland and Hungary, which I think together have some $50 billion of external debt. I think there should be a moratorium on both interest and principal for the next 3 years. The principal is obvious that these debts are not going to get repaid over the next 3 years, but an interest alone, a moratorium on interest for 3 years would release some $15 billion, which is a very serious amount of money. In terms of the longer range, I would like to essentially suggest the creation of a new institution, which we might call a development bank for Eastern Europe. There were two types of clashing philosophies after the war that I read about. One was by Mao Zedong, who thought that political power grew out of the barrel of a gun, and the other was Jean Monnet, who thought that political power grew out of the actions of economic institutions. And Mao Zedong may have been right in his time, but Jean Monnet is right today, in my judgment. And I believe that the beginning of the Europe of 1992 occurred in the 50s when Jean Monnet created the European Coal and Steel Authority, and that Europe was created as a result of these institutions: the Coal and Steel Authority, the European Atomic Energy Commission, the European Development Bank, and ultimately the European Common Market. And I would suggest a similar approach for Eastern Europe. Now, I don't believe that it is necessary for a political transition to be made that we require an absolute jump to a totally free market, capitalistic model economy in these countries. I think it does require the immediate adoption of a multi-party system, but I don't believe it requires the jump to a Polish stock exchange or a Hungarian futures market on options and some of these other wonderful things that we've invented. The reason I suggest a specialized economic institution, because I think it should become the focal point on the thousands of day-to-day negotiations that will have to take place and the other arrangements that make change possible in these countries. I think if we were to create this development bank for Eastern Europe, that it should be capitalized by the Western European countries, Japan, and the United States. That it should have on its board of directors representatives of the Western shareholders, representatives of those countries applying for assistance, which originally would be Poland and Hungary as eligible recipients, and a representative of the Soviet Union. I think it should be headquartered in Vienna, with branches in those countries that are getting assistance. Initially, it would be Warsaw and Budapest. And it should function as a hybrid of the World Bank and of the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, which we had in the United States in the 30s and which helped the United States get out of the Depression. The bank would be there to extend credits and other types of assistance to any Eastern European country which is eligible by the political standards that I've set. I think initially the capital of the bank could be set at $5 billion, with the United States, Japan, and West Germany subscribing to $1 billion each, and the balance of the OECD subscribing to the balance. With the same structure as the World Bank, you could have another $5 billion on call, against which the bank could issue bonds and finance itself, so that you would be creating a $10 billion financial capability. As and when other countries, which inevitably will happen, such as Czechoslovakia and Bulgaria, take the steps across the political Rubicon to a free system politically, they would become eligible for the same type of economic assistance, and the other terms of it, the debt restructuring, etc., would have to be done on a case-by-case basis as these countries require. I think that even under our presently strained financial conditions in this country, an investment of $1 billion for the capital of this bank initially, and a commitment of another $1 billion should be within the capacity of a country which can throw away $300 billion on savings and loans. The development bank would have a specialized staff with East European expertise, and it would provide development credits as part of the economic recovery programs of these countries. And these would be above and beyond whatever bilateral arrangements are made between the recipient countries and countries such as France, West Germany, etc. In addition, the bank could create, as I said earlier, I don't believe that it is necessary to jump immediately from a total command economy to a Western-type, fully free market economy. There will be a need for structures that may be mixed private and public structures, such as we had in the 30s, to develop credit for agriculture, to develop markets in mortgages, to develop rural electrification, all kinds of things that we can't imagine at this point, but that are going to require mixed structures. And I think the development bank should be the catalyst for these kinds of developments. Also, these countries are going to be deluged with proposals for joint ventures, for acquisitions, for all kinds of deals which they may not have a great deal of expertise in, and which the staff of the bank could assist them with. In addition, with countries that have functioned for 50 years on databases that are completely inaccurate, if not totally phony, the need to develop accurate accounting systems, legal structures to protect property rights, both physical and intellectual property rights, and all of the nitty-gritty that we're used to here and that enable us to manage, the development bank could provide some expertise in that area. Now, I said that I thought that representatives of the recipient country should be on the board of the bank together with the shareholders, and also that the Soviet Union should be represented on the board. I believe the Soviets should be there because they do play, first of all, they're the major trade partners for many of these countries, and trade credits and trade policy is going to be an important issue here. And secondly, as the guarantor, at least for the time being, of security in that area, I believe the Soviet Union is more likely to feel unthreatened by being around the table than if all kinds of decisions are taken without their being involved. I obviously have no illusion that the Soviet Union can either provide capital or expertise in any of the areas that we're going to be talking about. What is the ultimate objective of this exercise, as far as I can see? As I said, I don't believe the exercise is necessarily to jump these countries into our type of capitalism, because I think over time they may want to follow mixed systems, such as the Scandinavian system or even the Japanese model, or some other mixed models that are perfectly satisfactory if they work within a free political system. But I would follow the example of Jean Monnet and suggest that by the year 2000, the objective should be to have an Eastern European common market by the year 2000. That common market then could make its own arrangements with the European community and surround a Germany which, in my judgment, will be inevitably reunified, and probably reunified de facto, if not de jure, before the year 2000. I think that kind of an arrangement would also provide the Soviet Union with a relatively broad and stable economic and political bridge to the West. So that is at least a suggestion. I do believe in the power of economic institutions to effect political change. We have done it on a small scale in the city of New York, which is not so far removed from Poland sometimes. Through God bless you, to see that it's true. And that Jean Monnet's formula could be applied to Eastern Europe as it has been to Western Europe. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Felix. Those very thoughtful proposals. We now come to Professor Besançon.
I think I never participated to a meeting where I had to agree so totally with the orators. Everything has been said and said beautifully. I will limit myself to a few footnotes. A source of confusion in the West is to attribute to the supposed liberal will of Gorbachev what is in fact the symptoms of decomposition of the regime, against which Gorbachev has been appointed in order to fight, and which he fights actively, if unsuccessfully. We have also to understand, to keep in mind that Gorbachev followed, for the first year, a plan that failed. This plan was probably elaborated in the last years of Gorbachev era, around the foundation of institutes like the IMEMO or the Institute of America and Canada, and completed by Andropov. This plan had two correlated aspects, one international and the other domestic. Internationally, the targets were classical. Conservation of the acquired territory, decoupling United States from Europe, Germany from Europe, nuclear disarmament, massive access to Western subsidies and technology. That can be summed up by the slogan of a Common European House, but all this with more sophisticated means. Domestically, the target was the revitalization of the economy, revitalization of the party threatened by corruption, to put the economy up to the task of producing competitive weapons, and all that through a campaign, a classical campaign of enthusiasm, a modest purge, a tightening up the screws, and alcoholic prohibition. But this plan failed. Certainly, Gorbachev obtained a partial success in the international part of this plan. He succeeded in changing the image of his country, succeeded in maintaining every territory formally under a communist rule, and spreading Gorbimania. He gained some access to subsidies and to technology, but the decisive goals were not attained. United States troops stayed in Europe. Germany did not drift. There was no dissolution of NATO. There was no dramatic disarmament from our part. The domestic part of the plan failed totally. The neo-Stalinian way of the first 2 years in order to tighten up the economy failed. The neo-NEP that followed didn't succeed either. There was no cleaning and no resurrection of the party. The parliament, designed to be a school for a more active and more competitive party, became a school, if not of democracy, at least as a theater of the defeat sometimes and splitting of the party, and appeared to unexpected phenomena, the collapse of the economy below the modest norms of socialism and beyond any possibility of repair, and the quasi-insurrection of nationalities. That is a direct menace to the very existence of the USSR as a united entity. For the last 2 years, Gorbachev seems only to react to events. No coherent plan can be perceived. He surfs over the events and seems to govern on a day-to-day basis, taking profit of our incompetence, of our mistakes. From all that stems 3 questions. First, is a big crackdown possible? As you know, now in Soviet Union, everybody expects this crackdown, and the degree of anxiety is enormous. I should think that the crackdown is both unavoidable and hardly possible. It is carefully prepared. Many new laws allow the organs of repression to imprison, to club, to beat, and to shoot. Parts of the Red Army now have been moved to the Ministry of Interior, to the MVD, and Spetsnaz units and many units of this kind are trained to become the Soviet ZOMO. But the crackdown is politically useless. Well, it can obtain a return to the Brezhnev time, but what for? It can delay the fall, but for a few years. And after a time, the job is to be taken again in worse conditions. It is technically difficult. Now, part of the Soviet territories is no longer under control. Just to reconquer Azerbaijan, hundreds of thousands of soldiers would be necessary. And as you know now, 37% of the Red Army is composed of Muslims. And we have, in the Soviet Union, we have not, like in China, to deal with a few students on the Tiananmen place, but we have to deal with old nation, organized and determined. The crackdown also would be contradictory to the strategy of the foreign policy. When the image is already contested and the credits are not yet obtained, a mass repression could be unwelcome. So the repression has to be sold to the West. And there are many arguments. We have to repress in order to save the perestroika and to save the process of democratization. This argument has been used with the interdiction of strikes recently. We have to repress in order to save the peace, and Gorbachev can play with the instinct of order and the natural fear of the great collapse of the Soviet Götterdämmerung. But all that is risky. Grigorians told me recently that the Tbilisi slaughter was to be the signal of the great repression. And again, probably Gorbachev considered to launch it, to unleash it, with strikes in the coal mine this summer. But he hesitates, because the timing in using the violence is always a delicate matter. Too early it is, and too late can be very dangerous. Second question, is the dissolution of the USSR conceivable? More and more, the communist leadership is obliged to lay on the support of living forces. And the only remaining spiritual force is now Russian nationalism linked with Russian Orthodox Church. The alliance between Bolshevism and Russian nationalism backs to the first years of Lenin. Nationalism accepted Bolshevism as the only force able to keep the empire together. The Russian nation has been equally ill-treated as the others. It is now a ruined, a devastated nation. The only advantage it retired from the alliance is to keep, if not the reality, at least the illusion of domination. As said Custine, the kneeling slave dreams of the world empire. But it is not possible to change the basis of legitimacy from communism to Russian nationalism, for the simple reason that Russian nationalism is not strong enough to be a basis of legitimacy. It needs the communist technique of power, the internationalist ideology, the fiction of people friendship. So there is a dilemma. Or the Russian people is ready to accept the dissolution of the empire, including Ukraine. He has to give up the prospect of remaining a great power. Only the domination over Ukraine, historically, gave to Russia the status of a great power. Without Ukraine, Russia is something like a big Canada. But in revenge, without this domination, as a compensation, you open the perspective of liberty and prosperity. Or Russia prefers domination to liberty. It has to stick to communism. No real perestroika is possible in the framework of the USSR. The dissolution of this entity is the first decisive step. Solzhenitsyn clearly opted for the first part of the alternative. But we do not know if the majority of his people agrees with him on this point. I have the conversation with Afanasyev on this point. He answered, no, the Russian people prefers communism to domination to liberty, domination and communism to liberty. Although he himself accepts the Solzhenitsyn option. A third and last question, is a Brest-Litovsk in the way? As it has been told this morning, the crisis is exponential. However, there is in the Leninist experience a famous maneuver in such desperate situation, Brest-Litovsk. That is, Soviets give up everything except the power over a safe territory from which he can, or he hope, in better circumstances, to take the offensive again. I shall not be in Malta, I am not in the secret of the gods, but such a step could be critically dangerous for us. We ignore what will be the ultimate line of resistance chosen by Gorbachev, that is the limit of the Brest-Litovsk, of the new Brest-Litovsk Treaty. Is he ready to abandon Eastern Europe, the overseas satellites, Ethiopia, Nicaragua, Angola, Afghanistan? The example of Afghanistan shows how this abandonance can be deceiving. I am not totally reassured about the possibility of a Vichy evolution of the Polish Solidarność. Can he decide to let go the Balts and the Turks? That's not excluded, but more dubious. But it will certainly stick to Russia, Ukraine, Belarusia, and probably Georgia and Armenia. I am convinced that the West has no interest in being involved in a negotiation of that sort. We have not to give legitimacy to a Soviet-type regime wherever he asks us to give him. Let this regime rot in his own mess. For the last 70 years, the Soviets follow a consistent strategy against us, against what they call capitalism. We never built any coherent strategy against communism. It is not within the reach of democracy. On the contrary, we fly to the rescue of the Soviet regime many times. Brest-Litovsk in 1918, Hoover Mission in 1920, and the subsequent recognition de jure of the Soviet regime, Lend-Lease in 41, passivity and inaction between 53 and 56, massive food aid in 74. Save the Soviet regime, maintain the unity of the USSR are the two services Gorbachev expects from us. And that is why he is speaking already of a new Yalta at Malta. This time it would be a defensive Yalta, that is a Brest-Litovsk. But I think that it is not a moral duty to comply with him, let alone a political wisdom. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. We now come to Ambassador Abshire. David?
Thank you, Malcolm. Let me first say that I think today with this program by RFE-RL Fund, we celebrate a great victory. The magnitude of that victory, I think, is difficult for us to comprehend because the Western Alliance has prevented World War III. It's turned back the Cold War. Eastern Europe has been opened up to democratic forces in a way that none of us would have guessed. To me, the danger is complacency. Will we finish the course? Will we forget how we've succeeded? Will we apply the successful lessons of how we have succeeded to the future, or will we throw them away? Now, this victory that has been won has not been automatic. In terms of the military technological contest, support waned in the last few years in this country, as Ed Rowney so well knows. Allied unity and strength with the SS-20 blackmail strategy, there was danger that some of the smaller European countries would not have followed through, but they did in deployment. It was touch and go at times. On the human rights front, whether the Helsinki Accords would be turned to our advantage, as they were. And RFE-RL, nearly killed within 1 week of dying in the Senate of the United States with a cutoff of funds. Or the following year, where we nearly lost our basing structure for the transmitters in Europe. So to me, the question is, having won, will we have the unity and persistence, the strategy and the imagination to face a more uncertain future with such promise, but with such dangers? Now, strategy talks about priorities, and certainly as we talk about Poland today, there should be a priority to Poland. We've put billions into our defense buildup. Will we place millions where they're now needed, and will we set up the conditions for our private sector resources to be successful there? The EC should be out in front. Our leadership should be more indirect, but we must offer the vision and the conceptual framework in this leadership. But in a larger sense, as this communist system is falling apart, will we see the Western system of open markets and security maintained, or will that, over the next decade, fall apart as the Atlantic and Pacific becomes involved, hopefully not in trade wars, Some, I've just gotten back from Japan, some talk about Japan, the new enemy. Some, fewer, talk about Fortress Europe as a possible enemy. Those open markets and those cooperative ventures of aid with the Japanese and with the European countries and others are certainly key. But to dwell for just a minute on that security system, which I think is more important than ever today, Atlantic and Pacific, because these problems have a global relationship. We must take out that insurance during this uncertain period of transition. George Bush talks about the Soviet Union in the community of nations. We are not there yet. We hope to be there. And we're in a period of transition. There is always a chance of reversion. And the lesson of Deng is that when someone is losing power, his conduct can be very unpredictable when that power is threatened. Even with the drawdown of Soviet forces, there will be enormous military capability left. If we're out of Europe, that is the dominant military power in Europe by far. In the 1950s, the threat was clear, and in a sense, the danger was less because of predictability and clear lines even when we got into the Berlin crises or the Cuban Missile Crisis. In the 1990s, the threat is less, but the danger in view of unpredictable circumstances can be higher. So therefore, a security system of democracies, the NATO alliance in case of Europe, is more important than ever. People forget that that is first a political and not a military alliance. And it's the policies of cohesion that have done as much, if not more, than the military to prevent East-West conflict. Second, that alliance is key in the reshaping of security. That alliance system at the top level meets several times a week. 16 countries talking to each other. The Vienna negotiations on arms control, troop reductions are coordinated from there. And the danger is that the West will disarm more quickly than the East. Military power will be at lower levels, but it is essential that that military power be in a stable way, because at reduced levels, that power can end up less stable unless we have a conceptual framework. So that alliance becomes a structure not for the status quo, but a structure for change. Therefore, in my judgment, it is crucial that we not cast aside these institutions that have brought us to this point of victory, particularly in this period of uncertain transition. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, timing is everything, and you see we've lived up to our schedule, and Ambassador Abshire finished at the right moment. We're delighted to welcome as our guest Mr. Lech Walesa, who has just come from a session of the United States Congress where he met with members of the Senate and the House, and I'm sure he will answer questions about what he told them and what they told him. We have today to introduce Mr. Walesa, Mr. Zbigniew Brzezinski, whom you know has had a distinguished career in American diplomacy, national security advisor, advisor to presidents. He's always there at the right time. He's just returned from Moscow, where he addressed 500 members of the diplomatic corps, came back to Washington, informed the president on what was happening in Eastern Europe, and then the wall came down. Mr. Brzezinski, it's your podium.
Ladies and gentlemen, my task is not to introduce, but on your behalf and mine, to welcome and to salute a man whose personal courage, political flair, and historical wisdom have contributed so decisively to the approaching end of the totalitarian nightmare. Someday historians will study the rise of Solidarność and Lech Wałęsa's leadership of it as the antithesis of communism, philosophically, organizationally, psychologically. Communism was the expression of blind faith in impersonal social forces based on total subordination of the individual. Solidarność expressed the triumph of human faith in the primacy and supremacy of individual spirit. Let me draw just a few comparisons between Lech Wałęsa and his Solidarność and Vladimir Lenin and his Bolshevik Party. Though both identified themselves with the working class, the contrast between them could not be sharper. Wałęsa reflects historical spontaneity and social solidarity. Lenin exuded historical determinism and class hatred. Wałęsa's commitment is derived from faith in God, publicly acknowledged. Lenin's fanaticism was rooted in militant atheism, publicly imposed. Wałęsa's goal is a democracy based on social justice and freedom of choice. Lenin's objective has been the so-called dictatorship of the proletariat, based on the permanent rule by an intolerant and brutal political elite. Leninism bred Stalinism. Solidarity is giving birth to democracy. Ladies and gentlemen, we live in an age in which human rights is the true historical inevitability of our time. In an age when Wałęsa's solidarity has paved the way for freedom, not only in Poland, but in Hungary, now in East Germany, tomorrow in Czechoslovakia, and soon thereafter, we hope, in the Soviet Union itself. For that, we owe much to this man. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Lech Wałęsa.
Mili Państwo,
ladies and gentlemen,
ja serdecznie witam i dziękuję za
thank you very
moje
much
przywitanie.
for inviting me and welcoming me
Ale
here.
jednocześnie uważałem, że ja mam tu samych przyjaciół.
But I always thought I have friends here, nobody else but
A
friends.
teraz mam trochę wątpliwości.
And I'm beginning to have some doubts.
Mówić po polityku takim, po profesorze elektrykowi,
To speak for an electrician, to speak after a politician and a professor as Dr. Brzezinski, I don't know if there's a friendly act.
strasznie to trudne.
It's very, very difficult.
Dlatego nie będę dużo filozofował, aby nie podpaść.
So I will not be very philosophical. I don't want to embarrass myself.
Proszę Państwa, szczególnie Wam nie muszę mówić, że na los pracuje, czy na rozwiązanie pracuje strasznie dużo ludzi, a jednego się odznacza.
I don't have to tell you that thousands of people work for a situation, but only one is being distinguished.
W mojej karierze jest więcej przypadku niż pracy czy przygotowania.
In my career, there's more accident than hard work and preparation.
Oczywiście skoczyłem ten płot.
Indeed, I did jump over the
byłoby
fence.
gorzej, bo
Today will be more difficult because of my
a więc
figure.
nie byłoby tej drogi.
So that road would not happen
A
probably.
więc dobrze, że się w tamtym czasie to stało.
So it's good that it happened 10 years ago or 9 years ago.
A jak widzicie po mnie, mają ochotę inni na Nobla i
But
na
as you can
przeskakiwanie
see,
płotów.
recently others also want to have the Nobel Prize and they're jumping over a wall.
Z tym, że chciałem powiedzieć już trochę teraz bardziej poważnie.
More seriously.
Nie muszę znów udowadniać wam tu, bo pan profesor też mnie słucha, że zrobiliście strasznie dużo dla tej rewolucji na drodze ewolucyjnej.
You did a lot for that revolution in an evolutionary way that's happening in Poland.
Oczywiście prawdopodobnie wam, jak dobremu koniowi, nikt nie podziękuje, a jeszcze bata przyłoży.
Probably, as it happens with good horses, nobody's going to thank you. On the contrary, some are going to criticize you.
Ale to jest taka ironia losu.
That's the irony of fate, if you want.
Na dzisiaj prosimy was, nie zrażajcie się tym.
Please, don't worry about that.
System, w którym ja żyję,
The system in which I live
nie ma szans, rozpadł się kompletnie.
has already collapsed.
On się nie nadaje na czasy, w których żyjemy.
The times are not good for that system.
Tragedią naszą jest, że wielu wcześniej do tego się nie
The
przygotowało.
tragedy is that many of us were not prepared for this collapse.
Co najmniej od 2 lat ten dokładny scenariusz
For 2 years
przewidzieliśmy
now, we did envisage this scenario,
i próbowaliśmy go w jakiś sposób realizować,
and we did try to implement things,
ale nie wyszło.
but it did not work that way.
Dzisiaj pytanie jest,
Today the question is,
jak rozwój dalej się potoczy.
how will this situation develop further?
Polska ma szansę przejść drogą ewolucyjną.
Poland has an opportunity to change in an evolutionary way.
Dlatego, że to przejście jest niebezpieczne i trudne.
It's a dangerous way, it's a dangerous road.
Że będzie wiele niezadowolenia
There'll be a lot of dissatisfaction,
i nie będzie kto miał nad tym niezadowoleniem panować.
and there's nobody to take control over that dissatisfaction.
My mamy jeden naród, jak wiecie,
You know, we have one nation.
bo drugi Niemcy wymordowali.
The other was killed by the Germans.
Mamy Kościół silny.
We have a very strong church.
Mamy wreszcie Solidarność i papieża.
We have the Pope, and we have
A
solidarity.
więc mamy wszystkie dane, by przez te niezadowolenie przejść.
And we have the chance to get over that period of dissatisfaction.
Gdyby było spokojnie, krok po kroku, pierwsza Polska, Węgry i tak dalej,
If it was in an orderly way, first Poland, then Hungary, and then other countries, then
moglibyśmy spać spokojnie.
we could have slept soundly.
A tak to jest pytanie, jak
Now the
daleko,
question
jak
is,
szybko runie,
How
z
quickly
jakim hukiem to wszystko
and
runie.
how noisily will that part of the world collapse?
Ja przewiduję mieszaną transakcję.
I think I envisage a mixed transaction or
A
proposition.
więc trochę będzie nieładnie rewolucji,
So
trochę
there'll be
ewolucji.
some revolution and there'll be some evolution.
Czym więcej wasz umysł, wasza praca,
The more you work, the more you get involved,
czym szybciej nadgoni to, co politycy nie zrobili zrobić,
the more you can help in catching up what the politicians didn't on time envisage,
tym większa szansa dla nas i niższe koszty.
the bigger chances we have and the lower the costs are going to be.
Ale zapomniałem się, ja miałem słuchać, a nie mówić.
I was supposed to listen to your questions and not talk, so...
Ale tak jak to elektryka się puści do...
But that's what happens when you allow an electrician in front of microphones and to diplomats.
Mili Państwo, ja teraz proszę Państwa, ja proszę Was, dziękując Wam za wielki wkład.
I want to thank you again for your great contribution.
Nie ma porównania mojego wkładu do Waszego.
There's no comparison between your contribution and my contribution.
Oczywiście to jest takie porównywalnie, jak kto jest większym mistrzem. Ten w boks w nos rozbija, czy ten co w szachy gra.
The comparison is who's better, the boxer who hits or the champion in chess.
Dwa mistrzowie w różnej klasie.
Two champions in two different areas.
I Wy jako mistrzowie w tej klasie, która właściwie zbudowała bokserów,
And in the field which you are the champions, the field of boxers.
nie zarażajcie się niczym.
Don't worry about it.
Kochajcie ludzkość, i
Keep
szczególnie
at it.
Europę Wschodnią.
Keep helping
Do
East
reform
Europe.
i do
Keep
rozwiązań,
Eastern Europe, help
które
Eastern Europe
będą-
in bringing the reforms,
które będą korzystne dla nas wszystkich.
which will eventually beneficial to us all.
Kończę i proszę o rozmowę bezpośrednią.
That's it for now. If you have any questions, I'll very glad to take them up.
Dlatego, że jest wiele tematów
Because there's
niejasnych
so
i tak dalej.
many subjects which are still unclear.
Gdyby się one tu udało jakiś stosunek mój i wasz przekonsultować,
If we could consult something here,
to byłoby nam wszystkim łatwiej,
it's going to be easier for us.
a ja miał bezpiecznie wracać do tego niebezpiecznego
And
kraju.
it's going to be easier for me to go back to that dangerous country as
Może
Poland.
nie do kraju, a systemu,
Not country, but the system.
który krótko mówiąc
Which, shortly
Stalina
speaking,
wyrzucił,
Threw out Stalin,
Lenina kopie, ale Marks obowiązuje.
kicking Lenin, but Marx is still in power. Jan Nowak na pytanie.
First question from Mr.
Jeszcze jedno, nie ma trudnych pytań, są skomplikowane odpowiedzi.
There are no difficult questions.
The first question is from Mr.
Pan
Marks.
Max, Piotr.
Incidentally, that's not the Marks you're talking about.
To nie jest ten Marx, o którym pan mówi.
Dobre.
Mr. Valenza, this is an audience that knows something about Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty.
Tak, to jest... Ci ludzie wiele o wolnej Europie i o Radio Liberty. o
During the
swoboda.
growth of
W
solidarity
czasie
and your
wzrostu
political rise,
Solidarności i w czasie
did the radios
państw...
have any effect upon your
Czy
domestic
radio
activity?
przydało się panu? Czy ono pomagało w takiej działalności?
Proszę Państwa,
Ladies and gentlemen,
Tego się nie da ustalić.
the Greek cannot be even described.
To jest niewyobrażalne, czy właśnie, czy bez słońca to byłaby Ziemia, czy...
What, would there be land on earth without the sun?
No radę, no radę.
A few days ago, Mr. Valenza, I had the pleasure of talking to you in Gdansk, and I asked you about the future of Radio Free Europe. And you said to me, yes, now that radio ought to be brought to Poland as with its headquarters. And I said to you, well, how do you imagine that could be carried out? Warsaw? Then you said, I think, seriously, not jokingly, no, right here in Gdansk. Now, was this a serious idea, or were you just joking?
Poważny pomysł, czy był to raczej żart?
Proszę Państwa, całkiem poważny.
Very serious.
Tylko że ja mam pewne propozycje i wnioski, tylko że dzisiaj nie jestem w stanie.
I do have some propositions and conclusions, but really I can't do it now here.
Udawanie dyplomaty przez tę godzinę
Pretending to be a diplomat for an hour in the Congress, it's too much.
Dlatego nie mam umysłu dobrego.
I can't answer that question very specifically.
Ale ja mówię, ale rzeczywiście do tego dojdzie. Jestem przekonany.
I think one day that's how the situation is going to develop.
Można tylko zażartować, że świat się w ogóle, na tym świecie się wszystko porąbało, jak to u nas ktoś powiedział.
As somebody says in Poland, everything is changing nowadays in the world.
No popatrzcie.
Let's look at it.
Niemcy o pokój walczą.
The Germans are fighting for peace.
Żydzi wojnę prowadzą, Polacy handlują.
Jews are fighting war and Poles are trading, involved in trade.
Are you satisfied with the degree of emergency food assistance to Poland
Czy cieszy się pan z pomocy, którą otrzyma pan dla
coming from the United States? And do you think this will carry through Poland to the most difficult winter
Czy
time?
to pozwoli przejść ten najtrudniejszy okres w zimie?
Jestem w trudnej sytuacji, w ogóle znalazłem się w trudnej sytuacji w Stanach.
I found myself in a very difficult situation here in the States.
Zbyt dużo sentymentu z mojej strony.
There's too much
i z
sentiment
tej
on my
strony.
part and there's too much sentiment on this part.
A sentyment nie pozwala w interesach.
And sentiments are not good in
Krótko
business.
mówiąc, Wałęsę kochają i oszczędzają i Wałęsa kocha i oszczędza.
Now they try to be helpful to Wałęsa and Wałęsa tries to be helpful to other.
Jaki dowód na to jest?
What's the proof to
Otóż
that?
w każdym, gdzie kraju byłem, coś mi się udało ładnego powiedzieć.
Wherever I went, in any country, I managed to say something nice.
Natomiast tu nie udało mi się nic.
And here I didn't manage
Dlatego,
anything.
że pracuję trochę, no właśnie sentymentalnie.
Because I'm too sentimental here.
W Kanadzie żartem powiedziałem w pierwszym momencie,
In Canada, for example, I joked to start out
że jeśli tak będzie szło jak idzie,
that if things go as they are going,
to rzeczywiście dacie nam piękny krawat, ale do trumny.
you will give us a beautiful tie, but we can use it in a coffin only.
Francuzom, jak byłem we Francji,
When I was in
mówiłem
France,
o tym, że zachowujecie się tak, że bardzo Wałęsie klaszczecie.
You act that you do applaud and clap Lech Wałęsa.
Ale jak tylko Wałęsa przyhamuje samochodem, to głowę w drugą stronę, żeby z kapeluszem nie wyszedł.
But as soon as Wałęsa stops his car, you turn your head away because you don't want him to see him coming up with his hat out.
W Stanach dzisiaj powiedziałem coś
In the
takiego,
States I said today,
że Polacy zrobili, a to dlatego się nie bardzo to pasuje, ale powiem. Otóż, że Polacy zbudowali piękną koronę.
I said early on, Poles did construct a beautiful crown,
Królewską koronę.
a royal crown,
Ale króla nie mają.
but they don't have a king.
A król to ekonomia.
And who's the king? Economy.
Król jest tu.
That's the king.
Oczywiście
Economics.
duży król.
Here's the king, a big king.
Czy ta korona nam się przyda? No, nie.
Can we use a crown if we don't have a king?
Bez króla, bez ekonomii?
Without economics?
Kiepski wymysł. No,
Not
bo
a very good
sentyment
idea,
jest.
because that's sentimental.
Ale ja panu nie odpowiedziałem na
But I
pytanie.
didn't answer your question.
The lady over there.
Here comes that dangerous question, the Baltic question.
Niebezpieczne pytanie, kraje
Once again,
bałtyckie.
my question would be, the Estonians, Latvians, Lithuanians have followed with great
Estońcy,
admiration and
Litwi,
inspiration what has been
Łotysze
happening with solidarity since the
Śledzili z wielką
beginning.
sympatią to, co się dzieje.
A number of Estonian
Solidarność.
dissidents were sent to the Gulag just for the simple
Wielu
fact that they sent a congratulatory telegram to
estońskich
you, Mr.
zostało wysłanych do
Valensa.
Gułagu tylko dlatego, że wysłał pan
And Balts continue
telegram.
to try to import solidarity materials into Estonia, amazingly, even though the borders are open now. those materials are still confiscated.
Te materiały są nadal
Would you have some words of support for Balts, for Estonians, Latvians, Lithuanians, and any prediction as to how
wyrazy
their
poparcia dla
future
narodów
will turn out?
bałtyckich i jak pan sądzi, jak się sytuacja rozwinie?
Oczywiście bardzo niewygodne pytanie.
It is a very awkward question.
I teraz odpowiadam, że oczywiście my, szczególnie ja, byłem wykształcony na tym haśle proletariusze wszystkich
I
krajów
was
łączcie
educated,
się.
brought up on this slogan, proletariats of the whole world unite.
I tak należało, ale to w 17 roku.
And that was right, back in 1917.
Dzisiaj mówimy inaczej.
Today we say
Nasz
something else.
kierunek jest w drugą stronę.
Our direction is the other way.
A więc dla proletariatu,
For the proletariat.
ale nie ulica ma rozwiązać problemy.
But it's not the streets that are supposed to solve the problem.
Ale nie ulica.
Yes, the problem should be solved for the sake of the street, but not by the
A
street.
jeśli tak, to koncepcje, które przechodzą, które są trafne, które pozwalają przejść dalej.
So we should use ideas which have a chance of going forward, develop.
Nie hasełka, nie fanfarady.
We don't need slogans.
Przecież ja, co obrywam i od was i gdzie indziej,
People keep telling me off,
to przez to, że nie mam szabelki.
that I don't have a sword in my hand.
Ja ją mam, ale ona jest powyginana.
I do have, but it's rather wavy. It's not
Ona
a
jest
straight.
skuteczna.
It's effective,
Nie zawsze widowiskowa.
but not very spectacular.
I dlatego tu reformy są niezbędne. Ja
So-
pani okrężne odpowiadam
I'm
oczywiście.
trying to answer your question in a very
A
convoluted
pani
way,
wybierze,
I
co
know.
pani będzie pasować. A więc tu reformy będą
Reforms will take place,
fajnie, ale my musimy być trenerami.
but we have to be the coaches.
Gdyby trener od razu położył 500 kg na plecy na pierwszym treningu,
If
połowę
the
zerwie się,
if
połowę
the coach
ucieknie.
would burden the athlete with 500 pounds on the first test or first
Dozować ciężary,
exercise, he'd break him. So it has to take steps and stages. It
Coraz
have-
większe, coraz wyższe i tak dalej.
And the burden has to be added up, must be added up.
Krótko mówiąc, o tym kraju i o tej sile, która dzisiaj istnieje, można powiedzieć, że ma szansę przetrwać tylko niezbyt dużą federacją.
The country
Ale
we have in mind, the big country we have in mind,
Ale
has the chance to survive only as a federation,
ale na zdrowych zasadach.
but a federation based on healthy
Czasy
principles.
kanciarstwa, oszukiwania, morderstwa skończyły.
Times of murder, cheating, killing are over.
Oczywiście, jeszcze przyjdzie płacić może.
Of course, there probably will be still some price to pay.
Ale zwyciężać może tylko to, co my proponujemy.
The way to win is to go our way.
Nie my, komputery.
I don't
rozwój
mean
cywilizacji.
mine, but computers, technology,
Ja, Lech
civilization.
Wałęsa, Solidarność i pan Gorbaczow usiedliśmy na epokę, która jedzie.
Lech Wałęsa, Mr. Gorbachev, we sort of we're sitting on the epoch that is now going, that's
Ale-
now moving forward.
I inni jeźdźcy też ją poprowadzą.
Others will also continue to lead.
Za nami może być ładniej, śmieszniej, ciekawiej.
Perhaps the
Ale
times
bez
after
nas
are going to be more interesting.
Zakombinowałem tak, że pani wybierze coś.
Look, you've got to choose what I said here.
Earlier this year, Solidarity spokesmen were quoted as saying that it would require at least $10 billion of aid in order for the Polish economy to survive and as a precondition for the continuation of reforms in Poland. Right now in the United States, we're talking about something like $1/2 of $1 billion over 3 years of time. Does the contrast between what we're talking about giving here in the United States and that original figure your spokesman gave earlier this year still exist, the magnitude of aid that is really needed?
Jest różnica między teoretykami i
There's a difference
praktykami.
between theoreticians and practical pragmatists.
Gdyby miało ratować stare rozwiązania, to rzeczywiście 10 miliardów może wystarczyło.
If I was supposed to save the old system, then perhaps $10 billion would be enough.
A może i nie.
Maybe not enough.
Moja propozycja jest bez pieniędzy właściwie.
I'm really suggesting to assist us without any
A to,
money.
co jest dawane przez rządy czy sugerowane, to jest tylko na podróż Kolumba.
What the money that we're getting is the money to pay the way of a
Może
Columbus
Kolumbów.
or
Z
Columbuses.
tej strony mają jechać do Polski,
They should come from America to
przejść
Poland,
przez dżunglę
go over the jungle,
pokomunistyczną,
the post-communist jungle,
uporządkować drogi,
find a way, create
drogi
the road,
bankowe,
create bank
ekonomiczne,
roads, economic
systemowe,
roads, new
brak
systematic roads,
kompetencji, głupoty, tempoty.
solve the problems coming out from stupidity,
Po
incompetence.
tych pieniądzach przyjdą
After them,
atrakcyjni biznesmeni
businessmen will follow.
i oni niech robią interes.
And let them do business in Poland.
Ja przyjechałem wam udowodnić, że
I
w
came here
Polsce i
to
w
prove
Europie Wschodniej jest straszliwy interes.
That you can make wonderful business in Poland and in
Nie ma-
Eastern Europe.
Ameryka nie ma porównania.
There's no comparison with America here.
Tu jest wszystko zrobione.
Here everything has been already done.
Tu interesu nie można zrobić.
Business is very difficult to
Interes się
make.
robi na głupocie i na brakach.
You make business when there's stupidity, you make business when there's lack
Tam
of
wystarcza
product.
jednego i drugiego.
There's plenty of stupidity and a hell of a huge lack of products.
A więc, Kolumbowie, jedźcie w tamtą
So
stronę
Columbus
za
is
pieniądze,
go to Poland,
przeczyście drogi,
pave the way,
a interes wejdzie.
and the business will follow suit.
Oczywiście trzeba zrobić najważniejsze drogi, to telefon,
So
telefaks,
we need telephones, faxes.
bo Europa Zachodnia jest chora na stabilność.
Western Europe is sick of stability,
Oczywiście.
with stability.
I dlatego też tych Kolumbów musi być więcej, bo jeden nie wystarczy.
So there must be many of those Columbuses.
I co my teraz potrzebujemy
So what we
od
need
Zachodu?
now from the West?
Tutaj teraz.
Now,
Właśnie na tych Kolumbów
yeah, we need the money to pave
Na
the
te
way
programy
for
bankowe
the
i
bank
inne.
programs.
i na zabezpieczenie, gdyby Kolumb zginął, żeby rodzinie wypłacić odszkodowanie.
We need the guarantees that we can pay insurance if to the family if the Columbus dies or something happens to him.
To znaczy te gwarancje.
We need
Chodzi
guarantees.
Te gwarancje, które żądają biznesmeni, mówią tak.
We want guarantees for businessmen.
Wałęsa to komunista, jako udaje.
Some of them say Wałęsa is a communist. He's just pretending not to be
Komunistom
one.
coś odbije, zabiorą.
No, he'll take something from the communists will take it away
Jak
from him.
50 lat się straszyło komunizmem,
For 50 years, people have been scared with communism.
odstraszyć jest trudno.
So it's not so easy to forget about that fear.
My ze swojej strony, z Polski, daliśmy wszystkie gwarancje.
We are giving us on Poland all the guarantees.
Mówimy, że wszystko zrobimy.
And we say we'll do whatever you tell us to do.
Otworzyliśmy drzwi, a nawet zdjęliśmy z zawias.
We've opened the window, or the doors, we've even removed the hinges.
Mówimy, nie, za mało.
And they're saying that's not enough.
Trzeba gwarancji, jak dla Amerykanina, amerykańskich.
We need American guarantees.
No i ja się pytam, komu te gwarancje?
Now, who needs those guarantees?
Przecież to wasi ludzie, znaczy tu mają przyjechać biznesmeni, którzy po interes tam jadą.
If American businessmen are supposed to go to America for business purposes,
Albo oni umią robić interes,
so
albo nie.
either they know how to make business, or they don't make
Ja im
no.
mówię krótko. Róbcie biznes, nie dajcie się oszukać.
I'm just telling you, go ahead, do the business,
A my
and
wam
don't get,
pomożemy.
don't get in trouble. We will help you out.
Teraz udowadnienie biznesu, ja nie wiem, może już jest udowodnienie do was doszło, jak nie, to udowadniam.
I'll try to prove my point here.
Takie na oko, żeby nie wbiłem się w te szczegóły.
I don't want to get involved into
te
details.
szukanie śrubek, tego nie, tylko takie widoczne rzeczy. Otóż wszystkie miasta polskie przez 45 lat w
For
ogóle nie
example,
malowane.
for 40 years, not one Polish city was ever painted.
2/3 miast trzeba rozebrać, bo to slumsy.
2/3 of the cities should be destroyed because they're slums.
Hańba.
And it's a disgrace.
Wszystkie samochody do wyrzucenia, bo albo graty,
All
albo
the cars should be thrown away because they are no good, destroyed, they need repairs or whatever.
Ja już nie mówię o telewizorach.
I'm not talking about TV, I'm not talking about washing machines.
No proszę panów, gdybym miał drugie tyle Polaków,
If I had twice as many
to
Poles,
20 im środki, to 20 lat mam robotę,
so we have 20 years of work to do.
żadnego bezrobocia i tak nie
There
uporządkuję.
won't be any unemployment because there's so much work
Czy
to do.
macie interes w
Now,
jakimś kraju?
can you see the business? Do we see another country in the world where so much opportunities exist?
A więc nie ma pytania, czy jest interes.
So the question is not whether there is business.
Niepodważalnie jest.
Yes, there is
Natomiast
place for business.
pytanie jest, jak go zrobić.
But the question is how to take chance, how to use the
Ale to nie
opportunity.
do mnie pytanie, to dla was. Czy
But
umiecie
that's not
robić,
my
czy nie?
answer. That's for you
Ja
to
wam
answer.
przedstawiam, że jest.
I'm telling
Wierzę,
you,
że go
yes,
umiecie.
there is a business opportunity.
Mało tego, jeśli go zrobicie,
What is more, if you
to
do
ja
get
przewiduję
involved,
wielki skok cywilizacyjny.
I envisage a huge civilizational upgrade.
Dlatego, że my odblokujemy wasze możliwości.
We will in a way help you in expanding your possibilities.
Gdybyście byli fenomeni, to na 20 lat. Wszystkie problemy, bezrobocia, kłopoty, wszystko rozwiązujemy. A co to jest? Rozwój cywilizacyjny.
We can solve a lot of problems, unemployment, your unemployment problems, because we need so much. And what's that? That's civilization progress.
A więc reformy nasze są w interesie waszym.
So our reforms are also in your interest.
A ja na tym zarobię.
And I'll make some money on that.
Na pewno mam Nobla w ekonomii.
And I'll get Nobel Prize in economy. So.
If you had a chance to talk to Mr. Gorbachev right now, what would you say?
Co pan będzie Gorbaczowowi?
Dzień dobry.
Good morning.
I teraz odpowiem panu, co on mi powiedział, zdrastwujcie.
And that's what he told me, zdravstvuyte.
Ja powiedział, na jaki język przechodzimy?
I'll ask him what language are we going to talk.
No i zaczęłaby się gra.
And we'd start playing a game.
Oczywiście mam dużo, ja nie żartuję, mam dużo do powiedzenia, tylko że
I do have a lot to say to Mr. Gorbachev.
do rozmów trzeba dwóch.
But you have to need two
Albo
people.
rozmowa jest przygotowana przez jakichś już specjalistów.
Either such a conversation would have to be prepared by specialists,
ustami, mówimy, że
and
coś
we really
mówimy,
then only move our lips,
a za nami załatwili już wszyscy.
and everything already has been solved before us.
Albo to my rozmawiamy,
Or we
po
are already
nas
talking.
idą ci, co załatwiają.
And then after we really have spoken, others take care of the small details.
Ponieważ jeszcze nie ma propozycji, nie ma przetartych nawet tych.
For the time being, there are no proposal, there are no sort of no inroads have been made.
Oczywiście z Wałęsą byłyby rozmowy wcześniej, kiedy było w Polsce niejasne.
A conversation with Wałęsa had sense when the situation in Poland was different, when it was unclear.
Tak, że on wszystko idzie dobrze.
But everything's okay. There's a government.
To Wałęsa nie jest potrzebny.
Wałęsa is not needed.
I to jest normalne. Ja nie mam
And
pretensji.
that's normal. I like
Ja
that.
się ustawiłem, chcę robić robotę i robię ją.
I've got my things to do, and that's what I'm doing.
Natomiast ja rozumiem straszne kłopoty Gorbaczowa.
But I do understand the terrible problems that Gorbachev has.
Ja kiedyś, chyba słyszeliście, nazwałem go żonglerem, który rzuca 100 piłek na raz.
I told that he's a juggler who's throwing 100 balls at the same
I
time.
na razie łapie je.
And for the time being, he's catching all of them.
Fantastycznie.
And that's fantastic.
Ale jak długo?
But how long?
Yes, I should like to ask a two-part question. First of all, in September, a Solidarity delegation participated in the founding inaugural Congress of the RUF, and the delegation was headed by Adam Michnik. I'd like to know whether you, Mr. Wałęsa, think does that show that Poland is in solidarity with Ukrainian aspirations?
Czy Polska jest Could you go a bit slower, please? I'll just translate. It's okay. Czy Solidarność solidaryzuje się z ruchem ukraińskim?
And the second part question is, what relationship, if any, has Solidarity cultivated with the striking miners in Soviet Union?
Jakie są stosunki, jeśli jakiekolwiek, między Solidarnością strajkującymi robotnikami, górnikami w Związku Radzieckim?
To jest te same pytanie proletariusze wszystkich krajów, łączcie się.
It's the same thing. We go back to the proletarians of the world
Ja już
unite.
lekko mówiłem, ja wiem, o co pani chodzi.
I know what your question is aimed at.
Panią, my musimy być skuteczni.
We must be effective.
My musimy nie popisywać się.
We shouldn't show off.
A rozwiązywać problemy.
We should solve problems.
To są rzeczy, które się budzą.
These are things which are in state of understanding. They are now being they're giving life. They're coming to life.
Ale to też są rzeczy, które judzą.
But these things also irritate people.
Nie należy niedźwiedzia za wąsy pociągać.
There's no point in pulling the bear by his mustache.
Lepiej łaskotać.
It's better to tickle him.
Hello. My question relates to the example that Mr. Wałęsa's achievements have in other countries, particularly the United States. There was an explicit parallel drawn this weekend in Washington between events in Eastern Europe, solidarity in Poland and in East Germany on the one hand, and the abortion rights movement in this country on the other, by Maliar speaking to this mobilization on Sunday. And I would like to ask if Mr. Wałęsa agrees or disagrees with this claim of affinity, especially in view of the resolution on this topic that will be before the AFL-CIO gathering in Philadelphia. Yes, I'm sorry.
Czy pan zgadza się z tym łączeniem tych dwóch spraw, Europy Wschodniej, Solidarności, przerywania ciąży z jednej
Before
strony,
the AFL gathering in
przede
Philadelphia.
wszystkim przed zjazdem AFL-CIO w
Jeśli
Filadelfii.
są tacy, co połączą, to
Look, if there are people who can somehow link to those problems, that's fine with
a
me.
więc to zależy od tego, czy ktoś jest mechanik do połączenia.
Is there somebody who can link those issues?
Ale to jest, to wie pan, to jest tak obrazowo.
To be very picturesque.
Trzeba zastanowić się, na ile mądre, na ile się da, bo wie pan.
How clever it is, how smart it is. What is the point?
Ogień z wodą też można
Or
połączyć.
you can theoretically link together water with fire,
Tylko nie znalazł się ten, co
but
połączył.
we don't know who. There's nobody. So far, we didn't find anybody who could do it.
Żadnego z tych problemów ja nie lekceważę.
I'm not.
Ja jestem wierzący.
I'm a believer.
I mam 8 dzieci.
And I have 8 children.
Pan pójdzie za mną.
Sorry?
Pan pójdzie za mną.
Why don't you follow my example, you know?
To było pierwsze.
That's one.
what is the reaction of your country, Poland, on the prospects of a unified Germany? In reference to 2 points, the existence of an ethnic German minority in Poland and the issue of borders between Germany and Poland.
Niemieckiej w Polsce i wspólnej granicy polsko-niemieckiej.
Proszę Państwa, jak Polska reaguje na
How Poland reacts to unified Germany?
Żeby było jasne, ja nie jestem super rząd, ani prezydent.
I'm not the president, I'm not the prime minister, I'm not a government.
Ja powiem, jak Lech Wałęsa reaguje.
I'll tell you how Lech Wałęsa reacts.
Otóż mamy przykre doświadczenia.
We do have bad experience.
Nie możemy popełnić pomyłki.
We cannot make a mistake here.
Mówiłem Państwu, że w Polsce były dwa narody.
I told you that there was a time there were two nations in Poland.
Głupotę jeden naród wyrżnięto.
And through stupidity, one nation was totally killed.
Ta krew zobowiązuje.
And that blood puts an obligation on us.
Nie wolno zrobić pomyłki.
We cannot make a mistake.
A więc jednocześnie należy usunąć nienormalności.
But we also have to remove abnormal situation.
Nie można jednoczyć Europy na zasadzie Hitlera czy Stalina.
You cannot unite Europe on the basis of what Hitler or Stalin was suggesting.
Trzeba Europę zintegrować.
Europe must be integrated.
Usunąć podziały.
We must remove whatever divides.
Ale zrobić nie w tym momencie, moim zdaniem, nie politycznie.
But in my view, we should not start with politics. Leave the political situation as it is.
A zintegrować ekonomicznie.
But integrate it economically.
Wszystkie kraje, całą Europę.
And leave the situation for the moment as it is.
Tak, żeby zintegrować, żeby nie można znaleźć granic.
Integrated economically to the point where borders will not be found.
I dopiero tak zintegrowana Europa będzie bezpieczna.
And only then, thus integrated Europe,
I w tej integracji muszą brać udział wszyscy Europejczycy.
And such an integration process, all Europeans must take part
zasadach,
on equal rights,
bez przymusu,
without any enforcing.
I Stany i inne mocarstwa.
Including, but also United States and other parts.
Mamy dość niedobrych rzeczy.
We have enough of bad solutions, enough of lost blood.
Usuwać przeszkody i sztuczne podziały.
We must remove obstacles and artificial division.
Świata trzeba bezpieczeństwa, spokoju.
But this wonderful world of ours requires peace and progress.
Jest to możliwe.
It is possible.
A jest to i konieczne.
And it's necessary.
We talk about the need to develop the economy and the finance in Poland. Now, what about agriculture? The production of food in Poland used to be very efficient years ago. What is the place of agriculture development in Poland for the future?
Polska jest bogatym krajem.
Poland is a rich country as far as agriculture is
concerned. I w krótkim czasie wystarczy jej żywności, jeszcze będzie sprzedawał.
And in a short time it will be self-sufficient and it will be selling food too.
Chyba słyszeliście miesiąc temu ten mój przykład z kaczką.
Yeah, I don't know whether you heard, I've had an example about a duck.
Ale powtórzę go.
I'll repeat that example.
Otóż jechałem, takie mam od rodzinki, jechałem przez wioski.
I was driving the car from a weekend. I happened to like duck.
Po drodze spotkałem kaczkę.
And I saw a duck.
Pojechałem za nimi.
So I followed the ducks.
Doszłem do gospodarstwa.
And I reached the farmer.
O, kobieto, my
There was a woman. She said, "Hey, hi, Wałęsa, how are you?" I said, "Look,
sprzeda pani mi jedną.
Will you sell one of the ducks?"
I daję jej pieniądze.
And I'm giving her some money for it.
Doszłem z propozycji pieniędzy jak za samochód.
She refused, and I've given a price equal to the price of my car. And she said, "I'm not going to sell that duck."
Ja wie panie, czy pani nie lubi Wałęsy?
I asked her, "Look, don't you like Wałęsa?" She said, "I love you.
Dam panu darmo, ale nie
I'll give you the duck, but I won't sell you the duck." So what's the problem here?
Czym pan mi daje więcej pieniędzy, tym większy kłopot.
She told me, the more money you're offering me, the more you're confusing me.
Bo mam dużo, nie mam co zrobić.
I will have a lot of money, but there's no use. I can't buy anything. I can't buy a car. I can't buy a tractor. I can't buy a... No, thieves can just attack me. I don't need your money. So I won't sell that duck for you. Why am I giving this example?
Dlatego, że rolnik nie może skupić lodówki, pralki.
Because in Poland, a farmer cannot buy a tractor, cannot buy a washing machine, cannot buy a...
te pieniądze są za brzydkie.
The money is not beautiful enough to use as wallpaper.
Dlatego nie robi tych rzeczy.
So he's not interested in selling his products.
A druga nienormalność nasza.
And the other abnormal situation.
W sklepie, w kiosku można kupić mleko za 15 zł. To było kiedyś.
In Poland you could once buy a milk for 15 zlotys.
Te same mleko odnosił pan do zlewni, dostał pan 30.
And you take the same milk to a milk factory and sell it for 30 zlotys, or for double the amount that you bought it for.
Po co krowie głowę zawracać?
Why should a cow be bothered then?
This will be the last question. Anybody far back? All right, over there. This is the last question.
Bezkrowy interes zrobiony.
Can I direct my question in Polish to Mr.
Po
Wałęsa?
polsku chcę zapytać.
Panie Leszku, mam praktyczne pytanie. Jest pan świetny w odpowiedzi na takie pytanie. W tej sali znajduje się bardzo wielu przedstawicieli amerykańskiego biznesu, a także wielu konsultantów. Każdy z nich może w dużym sposób pomóc polskiej ekonomii, żeby dokonać upaństwowienia. Jest wiele terminów na tą reprywatyzację. Co chciałby pan powiedzieć tutaj tym specjalistom, konsultantom, biznesmenom?
Oby wam się chciało chcieć.
I hope you will want to make business in Poland. That's my answer. I hope you will want to make business in Poland.
Czy ten pierwszy krok wystarczy?
Is that enough?
Ale jaki?
What first step?
What they should do first? What would be first action?
Nie rozumiem.
I don't understand.
Jaki pierwszy krok?
Nie wiem, o czym mówię.
Czy ten pierwszy krok wystarczy, ale wcześniej?
What is the first step?
Nie. Pierwsza rzecz, ja miałem przyjść, pokazać wam wielki interes.
My job was to come here and tell you that there is business to be done in Poland.
I gonić za tymi, którzy mają coś w interesie.
And encourage those who want to make business, meet them.
Udowodnić, że jest.
To prove to them that business can be made. And I'm waiting for reactions.
Oczywiście moim zadaniem jest, aby wam wyrobić, żeby wam się chciało chcieć.
Yeah, my job is to encourage you to come to Poland.
A z tego wniosek, że będziemy wtedy wszyscy wspólnie więcej mieć.
And the result, I hope, will be that each of us, this will be profitable for everybody concerned.
Jeśli ktoś jest, to ja jestem gotów. Ja dopiero się rozkręciłem.
Nasz prezydenta nie mogą.
Ja się dopiero rozkręciłem, powtarzam. Aha, żeby wam się chciało chcieć, to wtedy będziemy wszyscy wspólnie więcej mieć.
Okay, we'll give 2 more questions from the floor. Then Mr. Marks will ask the final question. That'll be it. Yes, please.
Mr. Valenza, I'd like to ask you a question about solidarity. First, would you consider it more of a political movement or a trade union?
Solidarność dzisiaj jest ruchem związkowym czy ruchem politycznym?
And secondly, at a time when there's going to be increasing pressure in the plants and with the workers, at a time when there's an economic tightening up to meet the new needs, and the OPZZ will be challenging solidarity in the plants, what will be the solidarity policy?
Pierwsze pytanie?
Zapomniałem. Pierwsze pytanie było, czy to jest ruch związkowy, czy polityczny?
Proszę państwa, to jest trochę skomplikowana sprawa.
It's a rather complicated issue.
Trzeba pamiętać, kiedy zaczynaliśmy.
You've got to remember when we started.
Gdybyśmy w tamtym czasie spróbowali nie być związkiem zawodowym,
if then, when we began, we even try not to be a trade
to by nam lońka dało.
Then Mr. Brezhnev would really give us a lot of trouble.
W tamtym czasie można było zawalczyć o chleb, 5 kropek i wolność.
Or we could fight for bread, we could fight for freedom.
Każde inne postawienie sprawy byłoby tragiczne.
Any other attempt, any other formula would be tragic.
I dlatego teraz można odwrotnie już.
Today, the situation is somewhat changed.
Patrzmy tamtymi oczami, a nie
But let's remember where we began.
I oczywiście od początku w takiej sytuacji, jakiej byliśmy,
from the very beginning, as we were,
ruchem reform,
we were a movement of reforms
pod nazwą Solidarność,
called Solidarity,
który w różnym czasie różnie wygląda.
Which in different times looked differently.
I jeszcze trochę będzie różnie wyglądać.
And it will go through various stages in the future.
Ten ruch reform musi,
this movement of reforms,
ponieważ nie ma kto,
has to
przeprowadzić Polskę przez 3 pluralizmy.
Carry Poland through a period of 3 pluralisms.
Ekonomiczny,
economic, political, social, union pluralism.
Już przeprowadziliśmy prawie Polskę przez pluralizm polityczny.
We almost got Poland through the political pluralism.
To znaczy już partie polityczne właściwie są, nie zamykane.
The political parties, for practical purposes, already exist in Poland.
Będzie jakaś ustawa, która ureguluje ten problem.
Quite quickly we should have a new law which is going to deal with that issue.
A więc wolność polityczna.
So there will be political freedom.
I odpada temat temu ruchowi.
So the issue of whether this is a political movement is just becomes irrelevant.
Teraz ten ruch musi pomóc w temacie ekonomicznym i to właśnie robi.
The movement has to help in matters of economy. That's what we're trying to do now.
Jak zacznie pracować już ekonomia, rozwiązania
when the economy will start working,
zostanie nam temat związkowy.
we will then deal with union problems.
I oczywiście będą próbować niektórzy łączyć to.
Of course, there'll be people who will try to link those two
Ale to się
things,
źle skończy.
but that's going to lead to bad
Bo
things.
powiedzą takiemu panu Wałęsie, no człowieku, gdzie ty się... Właśnie.
So they're going to tell Mr. Wałęsa,
Politykę to partia polityczna.
what do you want? You're a politician, go to a political party.
Proszę bardzo, tam jest temat.
That's where you want to get if you want to get involved in
A ty weź
politics.
się za
And you
za
start
spraw
dealing with
związkowych.
unionists. You're a unionist.
A więc ruch reform pod nazwą Solidarność będzie związkiem zawodowym.
So the movement of reforms, Solidarity, will be a trade union.
I musi być związkiem
And
zawodowym.
must be a trade union.
Natomiast zanim stanie się dobrym związkiem, musi pomóc rozwiązać pewne problemy.
But before it becomes a good union, it has to help in solving some problems.
Nie można natomiast tak rozwiązywać, żeby później wejść w to i zatracić
We cannot,
to samo.
while doing that, however, we cannot lose our identity.
My nie możemy jeden monopol zastępować drugi.
We can't and we don't want to replace one monopoly with another monopoly.
Ja udowodniłem to Państwu wtedy, kiedy miałem propozycję zostać premierem, przegłosowaną.
And I'd prove that point, when I was offered the job of prime minister, which was voted.
Chrapkę miałem.
Yes, I did think I liked that idea.
Przyjeżdżał, byłaby marsz grany.
You know, wherever I came,
Bardzo lubię
they'd play national anthems, and I like it.
Ale byłoby co? Premier, przewodniczący związku.
But what would you have? A prime minister and a chairman of a trade union?
Ale monopol.
Well, that's really a monopoly.
Gorszy od komunistycznego.
Worse than a communist one.
I gorsi byśmy byli.
And we would be even worse.
Jestem przekonany.
And I'm quite convinced that would have happened.
Komuniści pierwsi też gnęli w więzieniach.
The first communists were also in jail.
A co oni z tego zrobili?
And what did they turn into?
Z nami byłoby tak samo.
And the same thing would happen to us.
Odeszliby ci fanatycy Wałęsy i inni.
Those fanatical supporters of Wałęsa would leave.
I przyszli praktycy.
And practical people would come.
Byśmy się poznali.
And we would really know where we go.
By mnie z grobu wyciągnęli.
They would, lead me to the grave.
Też budujemy pluralizm.
So we're building pluralism, we're helping to create pluralism
związkiem zawodowym.
because we do want to be a good trade union.
Oczywiście moi oponenci mówią, że
my opponents of course say
należy zacząć od związku.
That we should start with the union.
Ja nie wnikam, kto ma rację.
It's not important really who is right here.
Ja tylko wiem, że takie zakłady jak Huta Katowice,
I know, for example, that such places as the steel mill in Katowice,
która w mojej koncepcji ma być Muzeum Marksizmu, Leninizmu.
Well, my idea it should be turned to a museum of Leninism and Marxism.
Nie da rady ją zrobić, bo związki nie mogą na to pozwolić.
This cannot happen because the unions won't allow it.
I w związku z tym trzeba bronić interesów świata pracy.
So we have to defend the interests of the
Trzeba
working
być
people.
związkiem zawodowym.
We must be a trade
ale
union.
trzeba pozwolić na reformy.
But we also must allow reforms.
Bo zastąpienie jednych drugimi nic dobrego
because
nie
replacing one with the other won't lead to anything.
I tu jest główna niezgoda między tymi grupami, którymi oponują.
And that's where the problem lies.
Zdrada,
those different groups. People tell me that I've betrayed the union and what not. Too much politics.
To są drobne rzeczy.
But these are small things.
Jak na słoniu czy na tym te małe ptaczki, co wyciągają.
But these are really small things, like birds on an elephant trying to poke them.
Ale potrzebne, bo zdrowi,
But that helps, that helps me to keep things in the right perspective.
Last question, Mr. Marks. We thank you for your appearance here.
Dziękujemy
We're
za
grateful for the opportunity. But I have one last question.
Mam jedno pytanie, ostatnie pytanie do pana.
Last night you were guests of President and Mrs. Bush at dinner.
Był pan wczoraj wieczorem gościem
Today you
prezydenta
had
Busha.
lunch with the members of the House of
Dzisiaj zjadł pan
Representatives
obiad
in the
z
United States
przedstawicielami
Senate.
Izby Reprezentantów i
Will you
Senatu.
comment on those meetings and the
Czy można
hospitality?
powiedzieć pan kilka słów na temat tych przebiegu spotkania?
Tak
tych
jest.
spotkań?
Oba obiady były smaczne.
The dinner and the lunch were both very good. That's my comment.
Thank you so much.
Peter, you did a marvelous job.
I hope there'll be an office
There will be
soon. Jestem zawsze.
Dobrze, dziękuję bardzo.
Stay here, I want to thank you. Please stay in your seats. We have a few more moments left for the panel. Please remain in your seats because we're going to resume as soon as Mr. Valenza leaves.
Yes?
More the American style. To Americans.
Yes, he's cunning. He's cunning. He's playing the peasant, the simple man, the small man.
All right.
And also of himself in the third person.
Would you please close that door? Ladies and gentlemen, let me ask you to remain in your seats. Please close that door. Yep. Let me ask you to please remain in your seats for a few moments so we can wind this up. Your attention, please. May I ask you please to resume your seats and let me wind this program up? Well, it's been an interesting day and a memorable one for those of us who planned it, and I hope you agree that it's been worth your while to attend. I think it's fitting and proper that we thank the moderator and his panel for an exciting program. I'm sorry we didn't have time to ask lots of questions. I think it'd be anticlimactic at this point to do so, but we're grateful to you, Steve Forbes, and your panel, and I'm sure the audience will agree with me that we're indebted to you for this performance. I mentioned earlier that we'll have a transcript of the proceedings. Let me repeat, if you want the printed copy, leave your card at the front table, and we'll try to get it out very promptly. As you know, the program was broadcast by C-SPAN. It'll be carried at some point during the week. If any of you want to know the schedule so you can see how you looked on camera, why, ask at the front desk and they'll tell you that. Many thanks to all of you for coming. We won't do this every year, but hopefully events will justify doing it sometime again in the future. Thanks to all of you.
If you'd like more information about this program, you can write to Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty Fund, 1333 New Hampshire Avenue Northwest, number 600, Washington, D.C., and the zip code is 20036. Stay with us now for live coverage of the United States Senate, coming up next.
You're watching C-SPAN 2.